turning now to Tulsi Gabbard, her confirmation hearing has been set for this week. No nominee of Donald Trump's has caused more bipartisan outrage than Tulsi Gabbard. People from the Republican Party have voiced outrage, and obviously Democrats have too. And why? Because Tulsi Gabbard, a combat veteran, has been a proponent at times in her career, which is, very mixed, of diplomacy, and has been skeptical of the claims that have brought the U.S. To war, as she saw firsthand on the ground in Iraq, where she saw people being killed and wounded over the lies told by the Bush administration based on faulty intelligence. And now she's being tasked to oversee the U.S. intelligence community. So people who thrive off of lying to the public and taking the country to war are understandably very upset over her nomination. And they include figures like John Brennan, the former director of the CIA, who made the jump after leaving the CIA to being an analyst on MSNBC because, why not? It's a very fitting transition because that's a network that often launders the lies that people like John Brennan concoct to take the country to war. So this is John Brennan speaking out against Tulsi Gabbard's nomination.
Intelligence director, CIA play in order to ensure that the people who have to make those decisions in the Security Council are fully informed about what the reality is, what the intelligence is, what our intelligence gaps are. And if they withhold things or if they skew things, it really is going to be detrimental.
Real quick before we let you go, Director, do those agency heads have, in that moment you're describing in that room, have that realization that, wait a minute, that's not what we told you? I mean, in other words, how does that coordination become undone when the person who's putting the final brief is skewed the information?
Well, I like to think that, Secretary of State Rubio,
right,
who is very familiar with the intelligence profession, is going to be speaking up because you have the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, others who are going to be there. So you want to make sure, again, that you have people who are informed, but also people who want to know the truth.
Right.
And not just people who want to give President Trump what he wants to hear. That is so, so dangerous. And none of the 6 presidents that I work for ever wanted the intelligence community to give them what they wanted. They wanted the intelligence community to give them what they needed, and then they can make the appropriate policy decisions, taking into account what the intelligence says.
That last statement's so funny because John Brennan, references all these presidents he's worked for. They include George W. Bush, and John Brennan was at the CIA when the CIA was doctoring the intelligence to match the Bush administration's desire to invade Iraq. And so that's why the CIA was torturing people to come up with the fake intelligence that Iraq had WMDs and was working with Al-Qaeda. John Brennan was right there. He never raised the peep about it because he supported that agenda of doctoring intelligence to take the country to war. So he's livid that someone like Tulsi Gabbard, who called out the Iraq WMD hoax, called out so many other intelligence deceptions, is now being tasked to oversee the intelligence community. And his own record, again, he took part in framing Trump as a Russian agent, used the CIA for that. He spied on the Senate as the Senate was investigating the CIA's torture program. His agents hacked into Senate computers to undermine that. And he was at the CIA when the U.S. was waging one of the most expensive, dirty wars in its history, arming an insurgency dominated by Al-Qaeda, which Tulsi Gabbard also called out. And Tulsi Gabbard also raised questions about the CIA's claims that Assad was using chemical weapons, which was used as a pretext for the U.S. to bomb Syria and to impose sanctions on it. And Tulsi Gabbard has been a rare voice inside the U.S. government that has been critical of that. And it's obvious what he's scared about. He's obvious as someone with that track record of being right and being, justifiably skeptical is now going to be headed the same agencies that have been used to lie to people to take the country off to war.
Yeah. What about Tulsi Gabbard caving on Section 702, which authorizes the mass collection of intelligence through surveillance of Americans? The FISA courts, for example. She had been an opponent of mass surveillance. Now she caved. She obviously needed to win over Republicans like the hardliners, like Lindsey Graham. But John Brennan is someone who's aligned with the Democrats, who led the Russiagate hoax against Donald Trump, who also was heavily involved in the Syrian dirty war as CIA director and wants revenge on her for that. But it seems like now it's down to Tulsi Gabbard against the Democrat spooks.
Yeah, but there are still Republicans like Lindsey Graham who have not said that they'll vote for her yet, because Lindsey Graham, as we'll hear here, he wants her to basically kiss the ring of the neocons and basically promise that she's not going to challenge all of their deceptions. This is him speaking to Dana Bash.
You met with her. She's going to have a hearing to be the director of national intelligence this coming week. Are you going to support her?
We'll see how she does. I've known her on the same reserve unit. Richard Burr, who's a good friend of mine, is going to introduce her, so that goes a long way. But
we'll see is not a ringing endorsement.
Huh?
We'll see is
Yeah,
not.
well, we'll see is an honest answer. I tend to support everybody. I want to know about what happened in Syria and Edward Snowden, but I generally support everybody. If Richard has confidence in her, Burr, that will go along with me. But I do want to make sure that we understand Assad's not a good guy; he's a bad guy. That Iran is trying to kill all the Jews, just like the Nazis did, and they would come after us. They've tried to kill our president. They're going to keep coming after us. They will destroy the state of Israel. And I want people in that sphere to be clear-eyed about the world in which we live in. The largest state sponsor of terrorism is Iran, and they're religious Nazis. 80 years after the Holocaust, there's a group of people trying to get a nuclear weapon to kill all the Jews. They cannot be allowed to do so.
To kill all the Jews.
Yeah,
it's the Jew bomb. It's like what RFK speculated about the COVID jab or about COVID having special abilities to target only, or that Ashkenazi Jews were immune. It's like the inverse of that. Like Iran is creating a bomb that only attacks Jews. Obviously ridiculous commentary, but they've created, there's so much drama surrounding Tulsi and Kash Patel, who will be FBI director, because they have stepped away from the national security states line over the past few years. I expect that they'll just toe the Trump line and that they will be loyal to Trump. I don't know how much, what could plausibly be done with Syria at this point. The Trump initiative to make peace between Ukraine and Russia is completely stalled, with Keith Kellogg taking the reins, a very pro-war figure. I mean, they've suspended some aid to Ukraine that might force them to the table. But then you have picks that are less well-known, figures who are less well-known, who won't require confirmation, who've been selected to the Pentagon to serve in the Defense Department, like Michael Domino, who are coming under attack by the same forces that are targeting Tulsi Gabbard, but are actually pro-Israel Republicans, like David Wormser. This is like one of the pieces that Wormser has fed to the Zionist, ultra-Zionist press. This is Jewish Insider. It's like a right-wing Zionist publication. Pro-Israel Republicans alarmed over Trump's Defense Department appointee. Michael Domino, tapped as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, has said the U.S. has minimal to non-existent vital interests in the region. He's opposed to war in Iran, basically. He would support a deal with Iran. He's sort of a realist. Tulsi Gabbard has wavered on the Iran issue. At one point, I thought she understood the issue correctly. Then you see her hanging out with Shmuley Boteach again and declaring that Hamas presents this global threat. It's unclear where she stands.
She criticized Trump. She criticized Trump when he pulled out of the JCPOA, and that's what Lindsey Graham is referring to. He wants to make sure that the more recent Tulsi Gabbard, who, repeated basically Israeli propaganda after October 7th, that's the Tulsi Gabbard that we're going to get.
Right.
But I think the main fear from people like Lindsey Graham and John Brennan, of people like Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel, is not so much in policy, but it's just in the fact that they're going to maybe tell the truth to the American people. That's what they're alarmed by. Tulsi Gabbard, and when you're in an intelligence role, that's the opposite of what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to lie to the public to justify war. And Kash Patel, too, has undercovered serious abuses by the FBI in Russiagate. And that's what they're afraid of, is that people are going to be challenging the intelligence officials that lie to us, and maybe bringing some sunlight to their past deceptions. There's more freakouts. This is the Free Press, Barry Weiss's outlet, with an article today by Eli Lake about a guy named Dan Caldwell, who
Yeah.
has a top post at the Pentagon. And this is basically sourced to a bunch of anonymous officials who are afraid of Dan Caldwell because he's also a so-called restrainer. He doesn't want to be engaged in regime change and proxy wars abroad. So there's this effort, and we see this every single time there's anybody in government who isn't on board with like a neocon first agenda, is they try to sabotage them with these whisper campaigns. And that's what we're seeing with Tulsi Gabbard. That's what we're seeing with Dan Caldwell, because they're afraid of these people who will come in and not do what they're supposed to, which is fuel wars and lie to the public. I'll be curious to see what Bernie Sanders does. Bernie Sanders voted to confirm Marco Rubio, who was confirmed
99-0, right?
No, nothing, right? So Bernie Sanders, lifelong progressive, votes to confirm a Secretary of State with a history of warmongering that Bernie Sanders in the past has opposed. Is Bernie Sanders going to vote for Tulsi Gabbard, who has joined with Bernie Sanders on many positions throughout their careers and even defended Bernie Sanders and resigned from the DNC when Bernie Sanders was being undermined by the Clinton wing of the party? I'll be very curious to see what Bernie Sanders does there. I'm going to predict that he votes against her because Bernie showed himself to be such a moral coward on some critical issues. Not everything. I still admire some of the things he says and does, but on foreign policy, he's been missing in action for so long when it comes to being a genuine progressive. That's my prediction. I hope I'm wrong.
Well, he's outsourced his foreign policy brain to Matt Duss, who is basically a liberal think tanker.
Yeah.
And then you have these restrainers like Dan Caldwell. They come out of like the Quincy Institute Defense Priorities. They're not anti-war people. They're not pro-peace. They're in line with the Donald Trump of the 2016 campaign on the issue of war and peace. I mean, and they're sensible. They could have served also in an Obama administration before he just completely threw everyone under the bus, Chas Freeman and everyone else who was sensible. And David Wormser, according to the Trump Republicans who are more skeptical about war, is leading this campaign. David Wormser is someone who is intimately connected to Benjamin Netanyahu. He, I believe, helped produce the clean break paper in 1996 for Benjamin Netanyahu at a Israeli-sponsored think tank in Washington that charted Netanyahu's agenda for the region, which, if you actually read it carefully, spells out what the U.S. agenda would be after 9/11, including in really eerie, chilling terms, what the U.S. planned to do in northeastern Syria, which was to support the Sunni Arab tribes. In other words, what became the basis for ISIS in order to topple the Syrian government. The Salafist principality that Michael Flynn's DIA warned about back in 2015 under Obama. So Wormser and Barry Weiss and all of these publications, I guess Eli Lake would be one of them, are just representing Israel here in their opposition to the restrainers. It's pretty clear what the stakes are. And John Brennan, who's he speaking for? Like the quote unquote deep state, the CIA, the career professionals in the CIA, and the operatives who want total opacity and don't want to be interfered with, who want to set the agenda. They should all be fired. They should be scattered to the wind. They should be actually ended and replaced with something that is not a secret government. I didn't come up with that idea. The radical anti-war extremist Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan came up with that idea and put forward a bill to end the CIA and reorganize it under the auspices of the State Department back in the 1970s after the Phoenix program was exposed. So this isn't some crazy idea, but since the first Trump presidency, it feels like we've been living under this gigantic intelligence coup. So if there's anything good that can come out of a Trump presidency, it's at least that there's a clash between the civilian appointees, even Pete Hegseth. You know, I look forward to him gumming up the works at the Pentagon and causing a gigantic fight over anything possible, DEI, whatever it is, just disrupting business as usual at the Pentagon, because any defense secretary we're going to get is going to be pretty much a warmonger. And someone who comes from the defense industry, Lloyd Austin, Raytheon, Patrick Shanahan, Lockheed, they all walk through the revolving door. So at least let it be a complete goon who gums up the works and causes a fight. If Tulsi Gabbard can do anything to provide transparency to the secret government that controls our intelligence services, good. If Kash Patel can provide transparency to the political forces in the FBI and restrain them, good. I don't expect much else from them.